next generation is in a mental health crisis. Of course, as we've been walking through this series, mental and emotional unhealth hits everybody. It doesn't matter how old you are, your age, your gender, your demographic. It hits everyone across the board. But what the next generation is currently experiencing is possibly a greater challenge than our society has ever experienced. It can leave you speechless, wondering how in the world we can ever do anything to help. And some may even wonder if it's our role to help. We may be waiting for others to fix the problem. Isn't this better left up to counselors and therapists, to our education system, or the government? People who are trained and equipped, qualified to help bring about healing? Well, I would respond with this, and that's our bottom line for today, is that the church should be first in line to help with the healing of today's mental health crisis. We should be first in line. There are a couple of reasons for this. First, every local church is one generation away from becoming a dying church. If we only reach people that are my age and older, this is not church growth, this is simple math. All the people who are my age and older will get older and die. And if we only reach them, the church dies. We must reach younger generations for Jesus, or we die. Second comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6. It says, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all your strength. You must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home, when you are on the road, when you are going to bed, and when you are getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." This is God's command to parents and families about passing our faith to the next generation. But it's not just limited to parents, because this is actually aimed at the community as a whole. This is the church's responsibility. And by that, I don't mean church leaders or staff, because you are the church. God calls all of us to pass on our faith, whether you're a parent or a grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, a neighbor, a coach, a teacher, a volunteer, a mentor, or just an adult in a kid's life. You are part of how the church helps heal the mental health crisis. And when you're walking through mental or emotional unhealth with someone, it's easy to feel powerless, fearful, to not know what to do. But I want to tell you today that you are not powerless. In fact, your greatest weapon against despair is you. Also, notice that I said we should be first in line. That doesn't mean it's all on our shoulders. Obviously, God is a big part of this and the Holy Spirit's movement in lives. But families are also on the front lines with mental health struggles day in and day out. Counselors and therapists are a must. Sometimes medication is a practical and necessary step. Educators are certainly part of the formula. Research is showing that the more trusted adults a kid has in their life, the more likely they are to be healthy and succeed. Kids need more trusted adults in their lives. But we as the church cannot just sit back and wait and hope that somebody else fixes this crisis. We've got to be first in line. And not just leaving it to our kids and youth ministries, but all of us. Because how can kids and students hear about Jesus and respond if they're emotionally and mentally unhealthy enough to do so? Why do I care about this so much? Well, I spent 21 years as a youth pastor at this church. I sat with kids in their darkest moments. I've walked alongside parents as they're wondering how in the world they're going to figure this out. And as a dad, more importantly, I've walked through this and continue to walk through this with my own kids. I am far from perfect, and I'm not an expert, but I have learned a few lessons along the way that hopefully I can share with you today. And while we will focus quite a bit on the next generation, people who are 25 and younger, All of these practical application and action steps that we'll talk about will work for any single human being who's alive. So don't check out. Before we get into the things we can do, I want to share with you some statistics that will hopefully show you how dire this situation is. About a year ago, the Centers for Disease Control released results from their Youth Risk Behavior Survey, where they surveyed about 17,000 high school students. Here are some stats from that research. 42% of students felt persistent sadness or hopelessness. About 3 in 5 teen girls, about 1 in 3 boys. Persistent sadness is defined as feeling so sad or hopeless every day for at least 2 weeks that they stopped doing their usual activities. Post-pandemic, 1 in 3 adolescents have a clinically diagnosed anxiety disorder. 22% of students seriously considered attempting suicide. 1 in 3 girls, about 14% of boys. 18% of students made a suicide plan, about a quarter of our girls. 1 in 10 attempted suicide. And none of these stats include completed suicides, which in 2022, there were 6,036 suicides in the ages between 15 and 24. And I hope you see how something flipped there. Because in all of the other stats, our ladies were the higher number, and then we get to completed suicides, and our boys are almost quadruple the number of girls. This tells me a couple things. First of all, I think our ladies probably are a little more accurate and honest with how they feel. And number 2, our young men are hiding and concealing what's really going on inside. I hope this has your attention, and I hope that when you see these stats, they're not just numbers, but I hope you see faces. Faces of people that you love and care about, who you may or you may not know that they're hurting. Because they are here. They are here. There's another widespread trend among the next generation that is a growing concern, because alongside the mental health crisis is a crisis of mistrust. Kids in the next generation has a natural mistrust for adults and institutions. In fact, there's a study that shows that kids trust influencers on social media more than they trust institutions in our society that are led by adults. There are a lot of reasons for this, and we're not going to try to dig into or analyze those. But kids today and teens are wondering, can I trust you with all of me? At a recent training event where one of the speakers was sharing about this pandemic of mistrust, I was able to ask her if there's research that connects the mistrust to the mental health crisis. And she said, first, that she wasn't aware of any, but second, that there likely doesn't need to be, because it's a natural, logical step. If young people are struggling to trust adults, it's going to lead to adverse effects on their mental and emotional health. And all of this leads me back to our bottom line, is that the church should be first in line to help with the healing of this mental health crisis. So the big question for us is, what can we do? How can we help? And this is where I want to spend the bulk of our time today. Some tangible, helpful actions that we can do to help young people move toward health. And remember that these actions will work with anyone, not just the next generation. The first thing has to do with the last thing we just talked about, is that if kids today are having trouble trusting adults, then be an adult worth trusting. It's a pretty simple concept. If there's a crisis of mistrust, then be someone that can be trusted. Well, how do we do this? How do we build trust with others? Trust is built one small act at a time. It is putting in time over the course of time. Repetition. We gain trust slowly, but we lose trust fast. You've probably experienced this in one of your relationships, or many, where you've said something, or done something, or not done something, and you lost trust in a moment that maybe took you years or more to gain back. Trust is often extended before it's earned. And sometimes it means you have to be vulnerable. We saw this in my Rooted group over last fall. as we went around from week to week and took turns sharing our stories. And people were vulnerable and said, hey, here's my mess. Here's some things that have happened in my life. Here's how Jesus came into that. And when you're given that gift from somebody else, it is such an honor to be trusted with that you can't help but grow closer to them, to build community with them, to trust them more because they've trusted you. And so sometimes in order to gain trust, you have to give it first. Another thing is that most of us learn to trust Jesus by trusting someone who trusts Jesus. I mean, who are these people in your life? Who did you do life with that walked with Jesus, and through that experience and that relationship, you grew closer to Jesus because of that? You trusted Jesus more. And then how can you be that for someone else? When young people see our church, when they see the institution of the church, do they see something that's fractured and divided? Or do they see something that's alive, that's unified, and that's pursuing Jesus before anything else? Be someone worth trusting. I want to share with you an experience that one of our high school girls had with her small group leaders in our youth ministry. Here's Hannah's story.
At the beginning of last semester, I found myself in a really hard place. Some things had happened in my life that no one should ever have to go through. These led me to be dealing with a lot of anxiety and panic attacks. I had thoughts of loneliness and felt stuck, like I wouldn't be able to leave that loneliness. In that time of my life, I wasn't exactly sure what I needed, but I knew I didn't want to continue to be in that place I was in. I also knew that this wasn't something I could face on my own. I have a couple of youth group volunteers in my life that I turn to in those things. These are leaders that I learned to trust that really helped me to manage and start working through some of the things that I was dealing with and going through. They didn't have to do anything extreme, but one of the biggest things that helped me was just knowing that they listened. I knew I could talk through what had happened and what I was feeling within, and it was a safe place to share those things. At the end of each day, they had me tell them at least 3 highs from that day. This stopped me from thinking solely on the lows of each day. They communicated things with me like, we are proud of you and you are cared about. They encouraged me when progress was being made and checked in with me, reminding me to breathe where I could find breath. They helped me to see and know the truth from Scripture and not just the lies of the world. In moments of deep anxiety, they would pray over me. They would continue to point me towards Jesus and His Word, even when it might have been annoying in the moment to hear things like, have you talked to God today, or have you listened to worship music today? All those things were helpful, but again, the biggest thing was knowing that they were going to give me a space to feel and to say what I needed to say, knowing that nothing would change how they felt about me or how much they cared. Things aren't perfect now, but they are getting better. And I'm thankful for adults in my life who care, listen, and who point me to Jesus consistently.
I hope you heard the themes that because of the built trust over time, she felt safe. Safe to share those heavy, dark things, those feelings, and that she was going to be accepted no matter what. It wasn't going to change how they viewed her. This is what trust does in relationships. And if you happen to be an adult that is trusted by a kid, when they open up with you and share with you things that are difficult and heavy, it is best to guide that person back to their loving parents. Because research is showing that the mental health of kids who conceal these big things from their parents is statistically much worse than those who are willing and able to have open dialogue with their parents. I want to talk to you a little bit about brain science for just a little bit. A book that's, if you're a parent or somebody that works with young people, this is a great resource called The Whole Brain Child. And some of what I'm going to talk about right now is from that resource. We're going to simplify things quite a bit. Of course, it's way more complex than this, but simplistically, the left side of the brain can be described as the logical side of the brain. And the right side of the brain can be simplistically described as the emotional side of the brain. A healthy brain works together. Both sides are working together to figure out what's going on, to react, to respond, to make decisions. The processing goes back and forth through channels to make sure that we're healthy. But when our emotions are hyper engaged, when we feel threatened, we cannot apply the logic from the left side of the brain to the emotions of the right side of the brain. Our brains literally won't work completely in those situations. The amygdala, which is the part of the brain that controls the fight, flight, or freeze response, it's like a loud siren going off saying, I am not safe, and our body's only focus is on our survival. Anybody who's married ever told their overreacting and hyper-emotional spouse to calm down? Yeah, how does that go for you? Yeah, I hear by the laughter, you're like, yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah, that is why. Because the emotional side of our brain is in gear, and the logical side of our brain is taking a break. And they don't work together in that moment. You can't logically process your emotions. Too often, we're quick to apply logical processing before the emotional processing has happened. And you can't do that. You can't apply logic when you're emotionally unsafe. And then we add on to that for adolescents that their brains are still developing. For males, up to age 25 is how long it takes before the brain is fully developed. The frontal cortex, which is responsible for higher end thinking, things like judgment, cause and effect, consequences, long-term planning, decision-making, none of these things are fully developed in the teenage brain. That's why if you see a teenage boy do or say something absolutely ridiculous, and you're like, what were you thinking? The answer is they weren't. Because that part of their brain isn't working yet. It's not fully developed. The functions of the two sides of the brain can even become detached, especially when you add in despair or trauma or stress to this already underdeveloped brain. And then the two sides of the brain can actually de-pair from one another. So what do we do? How do we respond to this? Well, the answer is in the power of connection. Connect to a young person on an emotional level. Because our brains are wired to respond to love and empathy, even in the middle of despair. And when we connect with another person and when someone empathizes with us and helps us feel seen, that's when the two sides of the brain can begin to heal. And this repairing can restore a wholeness that allows emotional processing then to flip over to logical processing. Let's talk about what we can do as trusted adults. And let me tell you this, you don't have to have any special training or a degree or certification to do these things, to walk out these steps that are helpful in the life of somebody who's struggling emotionally, mentally. It's another great book. If you're a parent or somebody who works with young people, a book called Seen. That is a phenomenal resource. A lot of these steps are from this book and a whole lot more. Also, if you are a young person, teenager, young adult, and you're in the middle of struggles, anxiety, depression, despair, this book, Beyond the Spiral, steps that you can work through and talk about why you shouldn't believe everything that anxiety is telling you. But what can we do? What are some steps that we can take as trusted adults? First is to be present. Presence influences healing more than anything. It actually kickstarts the brain's pairing process, the healing process. How can we be present? Show up. Show up in their life. Show up before they ask you to. As the adult in the relationship, it's your responsibility to show up, to initiate quality time and conversation with them. Don't wait for them to ask you. Show up when it matters to them. Do something that they enjoy, even if you don't. Show up with no agenda except to enjoy time with them, to cheer them on, to help them just to be themselves. Show up when it's inconvenient for you. One of my kids, the time that he likes to process those deep thoughts and emotions is about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night when mom and dad are checking out and ready to go to bed. usually even before that, and we get the, hey, can we go for a drive? Or can we talk? And sometimes when we go for a drive, there's no conversation that happens. He just needs time to process in a space where he's near somebody who loves him. Be willing to show up when it's inconvenient for you. Show up often. Find ways to be available consistently and predictably. Show up undistracted. And this is the pot calling the kettle black. Sometimes adults, our phones, our devices can be the obstacle between us and connecting with our kids or connecting with young people. It can keep us from being fully present. Maybe it's not your phone for you. Maybe it's work that you bring home. Maybe it's the sports that you're watching. I don't know what it is. My guess is that in this moment, you know exactly what it is for you. Show up undistracted. Now, showing up isn't the goal of parenting or mentoring. Secure attachment is the goal. But showing up is the first and foundational step for building secure attachment. Another way that can build connection and be present is to see them. And to see them, to truly see them, you've got to slow down enough to see their feelings, to see what they're experiencing, to hear their stories. Slow down enough to experience and express empathy. This is uncomfortable and it's messy, but our brains are designed to respond in predictable ways when we connect with others on a deep level and when we feel seen. In those moments, not all feelings should be acted upon, but all feelings should be acknowledged because they're still real. Even if they're inaccurate, they're still real. Growth then happens when we learn how to recognize those feelings and then discern, how do I act appropriately based on these feelings? But when someone is hurting, again, they don't care that their feelings are rational. All they know that they're hurt, they're sad, they're disappointed, they're rejected, they're angry, and the only question they have in that moment is, do you really see me? And when someone feels seen, you win their heart. And what a better step that is than fixing somebody's behavior. Because seeing them requires us to look beyond the behavior on the outside and try to understand what they may be feeling on the inside. So when you want to help someone with despair, you have to meet emotion with emotion, and you have to meet that right brain with the right brain. Now that doesn't mean, oh, well, you're having this blow up, so I'm going to get angry. Meeting emotion with emotion, I'm doing what Josh said. Anger will not work. It will just make it worse, I promise you. If you try to meet their emotion with your logic, you'll miss them. This is another area that I have failed time and again. Because I used to think that, okay, if you're feeling these big emotions and out of control, then I need to be over on the side of logic. I need to give you logic. I need to help you to get over to see this thing rationally by showing you how irrational you are. And it doesn't work. It does not work. You have to meet emotion with emotion. You have to allow for that emotional processing to happen before you can get to logical processing. And I will say this, it will take a while. It will take time. You may have to sit in the middle of their emotional explosion way longer than you want to in order to get to that point. But be willing to be present enough and to see them in that. Third way to be present and to connect is to just listen. You heard this in Hannah's testimony, her story. She just needed somebody who was willing to listen. They didn't need to do anything big. Just listen. And this is a key tool to reduce feelings of despair and to promote healing. Be willing to accept their big emotions and be willing to accept your own in the middle of it. You have to be the calm one. The hard thing to do is to not be triggered into a stress response or a freak out moment when they are having theirs. Staying calm. Also, don't be defensive. Even if their emotional rant attacks you, and it probably will. Being defensive is probably the greatest risk or obstacle in helping kids process their emotions, because when we do that, we've made it about us instead of allowing it to be about them. When you listen well, you communicate safety, so be safe. Your words, but also be very careful with your tone and your body language. For some kids, eye contact and appropriate physical touch can be really helpful when they're in despair. And for other kids, they do not want you to touch them, so stay away. Give them space. Read it. If they're uncomfortable with your approach, it's not them that needs to change, it's you. You need to change your approach and how they're handling it. Talk less. This is great advice for any time you want to listen better. Talk less. Your presence is more important than your words. They probably won't even remember what you said, but they'll remember that you were there with them, in it. Avoid lecturing at all costs. This will flip a shutdown switch in their brains. They will just phase out. They don't want to hear that. One of the most powerful responses you can give when someone starts telling you about their struggles, their feelings, is tell me more. Tell me more about what you experienced. Tell me more about those feelings. Tell me more about when you started to feel this for the first time. Tell me more. This puts them on the platform. It gives them the microphone. It shows them you're not interested not only in what they're saying, but you're interested in them. And it gives them a safe place to emotionally exhale. Please avoid cliches. This isn't a big deal. You're just a teen. You haven't really experienced stress and anxiety. Just pray about it. This will pass. Everything happens for a reason. Those platitudes are worthless to somebody who's in emotion. Does not help. It hurts more than it helps. Another powerful tool we can have in someone's life who's struggling is to speak life. Our culture has a way with negativity and attacking words. There's a barrage of critical and accusatory voices that just surround us. If you don't know what that looks like, get on any online platform that has a comments section. People can be absolutely terrible to one another. And then there's our self-talk, the self-criticism, the self-hatred, the loathing that we have, the tearing down that happens within our own minds. As the church, it is vital that we speak life into one another. We need to give encouragement and positivity. We need to lift and build one another up. We need to speak words that help people see God's fruit working in them, the gifts that the Holy Spirit has given them, and the purpose that He has for their lives. If we don't speak life, who will? Here's a couple of ways we can do this. Number one is affirm constantly. And this is about positivity. Because negative words and thoughts have much more impact on us than positive ones. Negative ones, they surface quicker, and they are much harder to discredit and to get rid of in our minds. So what we need to do is we need to overwhelm the negativity with positivity. We have to overwhelm it because it takes more positive comments to negate or counteract the negative one. Second thing we can do is we can give hope. We need hope to know that life holds immense value. Despite our imperfections, despite our mess, despite what the world says about us, God has placed unique attributes about who He is into each human being, into you, into them. People who are struggling need to know who they are, whose they are, and who they are not, because despair will capitalize on the who you're not, especially in ways where you feel like you're not enough. As the church and simply as human beings who care about one another, we must deliberately and clearly speak life into others. And when you do so, focus on character, not performance. Because we need to know that we're loved for who we are, not just for what we do. Dads, I'm going to talk to you for a minute. If you're a dad, please know that you play an enormous role in the life of your son or daughter. Your actions and your words or your lack thereof will help shape their destiny and have long-lasting effects. If you're the father of a daughter, it goes even further. You have to affirm your daughters. Not just by words and gestures, which are important, but by intentional and clear, consistent actions that send the message that I am here for you. No matter what's going on in my life or yours, I'm here for you. Research is clear that fathers play a pivotal role in their daughters' self-image, their self-esteem, and their body image. Studies show that girls with close and affirming relationships with their fathers are more likely to have self-confidence, perform better academically, and have more successful career advancement. Dads, speak life into your daughters. Here's the thing, that those you speak life into, they'll get used to it. And then when they experience something that's deflating, they'll return to you to tap the well of those life-giving words so that they can help recover and go back to a more healthy place. What better way to build that relationship in a way that they're going to come back to you time and time again to hear those life-giving words. Final tool you can use is to help somebody who's struggling to build grit. Now, grit is defined as passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement. Grit is a combination of resilience, ambition, and self-control in the pursuit of a goal that can take months or even decades to achieve. Similar to resilience, grit involves adapting to or bouncing back from adversity, which is the ability to positively adjust under the extremely challenging life conditions. Simple fact is that no matter who you are or where you come from, you're going to face challenges. Every one of us. We can't get away from it. Bad things will happen. You cannot avoid adversity. John 16:33, Jesus says this, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world we will have trouble. But then because Jesus speaks life, he continues, but take heart, I have overcome the world. For those who are struggling, knowing that we cannot avoid adversity, but also that Jesus has already overcome it. These are steps to us not resisting the lessons that come in the middle of adversity, but embracing them. How can I learn from this? How can I battle despair because I'm being taught something here? And I have to say this, building grit is absolutely not where you start. Other big mistakes that I made as a dad is if my kids were struggling with emotional and mental stuff, things that are going on, then I need to help them be tough enough mentally and emotionally to handle these things. And it was the wrong place to start. This is the last thing I'm giving you for a reason, because a lot of the other things have to happen before this ever does. All those other things have to happen first. If you are a young person, a young adult, and you have or you are experiencing struggles, mental health, emotional health, I want you to know this. You have a God who sees you. He knows you completely, inside and out. He knows your mess. He knows your sin. He knows your struggle. He knows your hurts. And he desperately loves you. He wants to be with you forever. And I also want you to know that we as a church, we want to see you. We accept you right where you are. And we want to help you, however we can, take steps toward health. Whatever that might look like. We're not going to be perfect, but we're going to do what we can. And here's where I want to close. Because if we as the church, we do these steps, we live out these things, here's what happens. There's reactions to these. When we show up, they feel loved. When we see them, they feel understood. When we listen, they feel safe. When we speak life, they feel worthy. And when we build grit, they feel empowered. And if you're not sure where to go from here, I would challenge you to just start with one tool, one person, one moment, and start today. Please pray with me. God, I thank you that you're a God who does all of these things. All of these are just attributes of you. Because God, you are present. You show up time and again in our lives. God, you listen to us without judgment. God, you see us in the middle of our mess, in the middle of our hurt. God, you speak life into us through your word, through the people that surround us. And God, you help us to grow and change, sometimes doing hard things. May we as a church just simply do what these attributes of you are. May we would just mirror who you are in the lives of other people as we walk alongside. God, help us to know when to step in, when to say something, when not to say anything, just to be present. God, give us opportunity to walk in the life of somebody who's struggling, to show up, to be present, to give time over time, and help them take